And then we started getting things like these relative layouts and being able to set things out and be able to control. But the biggest issue, and even during that 10 years, the biggest issue that we ran into was the fact that the view tree for layouts was humongous. It was larger than the actual file that we were using, because there were actual layouts that you didn't know that were in that stack unless you knew how to find it. Now, granted, I spent part of that time in Eclipse, which, that's another story for another day. And then, of course, Android Studio came out. So various widgets kind of came in through those times. And I think it was right about the time when I stopped working in the mobile space and kind of transitioned into teaching is when things like constraint layouts came out. Now, I don't know a huge amount about constraint layouts because I didn't really spend a lot of time in it. The only thing I could relate to it was that iOS had the same thing. And I thought, oh, great, we're going to end up transitioning to the way iOS builds theirs. And I didn't like their build system either. Yes, I'm looking at you, Jay. I did a small 6-month stint of iOS development, and I hated every minute of it. But it was Objective-C, not Swift. So I'm sure it's probably different. Well, one of the big issues with working with XML was this whole idea of having to create special files to do things that you would think would just be built into the platform, like button state. If you wanted to have a colored button and you wanted to change the color based on pressing it, you can just put a few colors in and make it work. You actually had to create this layer of XML of things where you had to control the press state. You had to control this state or whatever. And so right around probably the last 4 years is when Android or Google decided to try to solve this problem. And that was through Compose. And then I also didn't mention that they did add data binding into the system. I could never get it to work. And then they updated it to view binding, which I do have a piece of that working. But all in all, it's all about having to find an ID in order to do things, right? The binding system was supposed to prevent the need for that, but not everything can be not everything can work in that binding stuff. I know I spent some time trying to make that work myself and sort of gave up on it and just went to the IDs because, it's what we did. And then transitioning from Java to Kotlin was an even bigger transition from a code perspective because you had to think in multiple ways, right? So you didn't have to have everything in a class. So, so there's a lot of this history of working with the XML files, but then they came out with Compose. Now, when Compose first came out, what? I just accidentally unmuted. You're good. Oh. When Compose first came out, I, as somebody who is used to using XMLs and used to all this layering and these layouts, I was not very happy at the idea of writing Kotlin code to do my view. And I can explain this. I actually did in Java write out an entire page in Java code calling out every layout file and manipulating everything to do it. And that was the horrific experience. And I think maybe I had a PTSD moment. And so when Compose came out, I was like, no, there's no way I'm going to do this. I'll stick with what I know. This looks like it's too early. But they did come out with some pretty nifty things. Jetpack Compose, and it wasn't the only thing that came out in the Jetpack library. There are a multitude of other things. So before I get too far into this, of the people in the room, do you use Compose at all? Not yet? Okay. Maybe a little bit? Okay.
Yeah. Actually, exclusively at this point.
Okay. So the idea behind... What's that?
The person online also does.
Okay. There were 2 people there. Are they still both? Oh, sorry. All right. Well, the idea behind Compose is that they use functions as a way of creating UI. Now, the first time I saw that was actually in Flutter, and that was another reason why I was a little bit hesitant. I'm like, okay, are they just going to marry Flutter into Android? Because I watched a video where they said everything's a widget, and that made my head explode. It was a Flutter video. You remember that one? So again, I was a little bit hesitant about it, but then I started kind of messing around with this a little bit, just trying to see what was the big deal about using Compose. So one of the things that we reduced the need of is you don't have to use classes, which is great. There's no need for IDs. Not really. No, not the RIDs as we know of them. And there's some other little things we'll look at. But I have here controlled by the state or the arguments you pass, not some other system. So I have this other graphic here that I pulled from my old slide deck because I was going to do a presentation on this earlier in the year. So, and I had to write down some nifty stuff on my paper here. So we're declaring, so you see here, construct UI by describing what, not how. This is kind of what Google was trying to talk about when they talk about Compose, as the how is like the XML, whereas the what is the Compose. So the way my notes read here, we're declaring what our UI should look like by providing the necessary state to our UI function. But we are not telling Compose how it should render that state. We just tell it, just do it, right? Said number 2. It's actually in the slide notes, but I can't see the slide notes. That's why I got to use these. If the state controls the UI, how do we go about updating the state in order to update the UI? So how does this communication work? And it's done through events. So it's an event-driven system. See kind of the event handler there. So when a user interacts with the UI element, the UI emits an event such as an on-click. And the event handler can decide if the UI state should be changed or not. What, the third one? So if the UI state changes, the functions or UI elements that depend on the state will be re-executed. So this process they call regenerating. The UI, when the state changes, is recomposition. So it's the whole purpose behind it. So and I don't have this in my notes, but one of the things I can attest to it is it's also supposed to reduce the memory footprint, right? XMLs take up an extension amount of memory, but it's still faster in performance than Compose, but they're working on it. And in fact, when we get into what's new in Compose, which is the main part of this talk, that's one of the things that they improved was the performance with some of the things that they've updated. Yeah, I think that's as far as I'll read that goes. Does anybody have any questions before I show the first demo? Because we're going to do a comparison between XML and Compose. And I have the code for these. These are valid links. They're both the exact same application, but written XML versus Compose. Yes.
What's the fastest?
Fastest as far as execution or loading? Because that's a question. Here's how I've understood it. When it comes to loading for the first time, XML still wins. But once the app has been loaded and it's in the stack, then Compose takes over and it's faster. But they're working on that startup process. And one of the things that they did this year with some of the updates and this Material 3 and all that is if I remember from the blog, they said that they've been able to increase it by almost 20%. I'll have the link to the blog that I was reading. It's their blog, the Google's blog on what's new with Jetpack Compose. So I actually have the XML one loaded. Another thing that I will tell you, I'm on the Canary build of Android Studio for this. Not because of the XML, but because of another demo I'm going to show in a few minutes. But so I'm going to just switch over to that. So did it switch on your screen?
No, it's not. Because I think you were sharing the window.
Okay. So let me stop the share for a second and shift this over to my screen. Entire screen. Also share. No, I don't want to share the system audio.
So I think you have to click on the screen.
Just click on the screen.
Oh, yeah.
That's a weird use.
I'm used to Zoom. I'm not used to this. I have a Zoom account, because of what okay, there we go. How about now? Okay. So this is the Canary build. It's Iguana. Just to kind of describe it. Now, I could have went with the beta build because I could have gotten the same results, but I usually don't live on the edge of Canary, but I thought I would do that anyway. Here is an emulator. So I can show you what the app does. I'm not going to actually compile the app and show you. I'll do that with the next one, but I already have it installed on this emulator. So all I have to do is just run it. So just to so you can actually see what it looks like before I start showing you how I had to fix this. So this is a 2-tab navigation system. The first one has 2 cards. I have some simple text, 2 radio buttons, an entry box. So this is just a simple conversion. If I click in here, I can, of course, get all of the numbers. I can enter in a value. And if I hit enter on the thing here, I get the value in centimeters. It's very simple. If I switch this to centimeters, then I can hit the enter key again and it'll give me the inches. So it's just a simple conversion app, nothing too complex here. Same thing with the Fahrenheit to Celsius. I can easily come in and you can get the temperature. Now, another thing to show on here is the fact that I have this themed in green. So not only is the status bar green, but this bottom piece right here underneath the navigation bar is white. And I had to make those do that. It wasn't something that did it on its own. Now I'm using not material 3. I think this is using material 2 for some of the design, some of the UI pieces of this. The second one is just a simple list. And it's a list that has like 10 items in it. It's nothing special. Now it's supposed to have a toast message coming up, but it's not coming up right now. So it's either obscured by the navigation or something else. It's not really important. Really, I wanted to just show a simple list. Now, so this is green. This is all white. You can see the little bit of green here. So that's it. That's the app in and itself. So we're going to look at the code for this. I can see my own stuff. Too much dark mode here. So I'll start with the activity. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but I am not a fan of the designer in any way, shape, or form. They make these things look really pretty and all, but I've been working in XML for so long, I would rather look at the XML. The good news is at least I can right click on this and say, go to XML. So very, very nice and quick. So this is the navigation right here, this bottom nav. That was already in the code. I picked a template that had the bottom nav. The bottom nav system is actually using view binding. It's because it was working and I didn't have to touch it. All I had to do was just adjust it to account for my 2 items instead of the 3 that it comes with by default. Basic fragment, nothing too special here. It is using a constraint layout, so you can see it kind of does what it does. You can see the margin bottom takes into account the size of it uses the action bar size to represent the bottom nav. Very simple, nothing too complicated here. I only have one activity in this entire project, and it's all about switching back and forth between these two fragments, a convert fragment and an ice cream fragment, because it's ice cream flavors in the list. So I do have a standard custom adapter written for any kind of list view. I'm not going to go into the code piece because this is all about the XML part, not about the fragments. But the code's up there publicly. You can look at it and you can give me a hard time about it, whatever you want to do there. Again, kind of have to go to the XML piece. So this was the card that I made. So I used the card view, set the elevation to 16 density pixels there, and set the height at 220. Now, funny thing is, I built the Compose version first, and then I came back and built this one. So I had everything already set. Every value was already set before I even came in here. But as you can tell, we have linears, standard text view, radio groups, one radio group for the two buttons. And then the one thing that was different was this. So the text input, instead of an edit text box, I went with something fancier, mostly because I was trying to mirror exactly what I did in Compose. And this is what it is. It's a text input layout. So it's a new one. And it's been styled to match the outline box. So I don't know when they added this. I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years ago they added this one in there, because it definitely wasn't when I was working in the space, because I don't remember it. Does anybody remember when it might have came out?
I think it's been more than a couple of years.
Maybe it came out when I was working for a startup and we never needed to use it, so I didn't think nothing of it. But you have a layout, and then you have the actual text itself. So it's 2 layers of XML just to do one simple edit text box. And then, of course, I have a simple linear layout because that's how you add color to a screen, and then a text view for the output. So a lot of layers. And then, of course, I could have been fancy, made one card view. I did some fancy fragment manipulation because you can import layouts into. I did not have the time to do that. So this is one of those I didn't follow clean. I just duplicated it just so I could get it done. I spent several hours working on this project, not for this part, but for something else completely. I was trying to get data binding to work, and I was pulling my hair out again. So I just like, you know what? I'm going back to my roots and just doing it this way, and that'll be that. So the ice cream layout is just a pretty standard list. Nothing too complicated here. It's a recycle view, and then so the recycle view handles the main part, and then this is actually what I used for the list. So the lists are also a card. So every one of those is a card view, which not sure if anybody really used cards for lists, but that's what I chose for the surface of instead of doing the traditional way of doing it. But just a card view with a simple image and some text. Nothing complicated here. All right. So with that being said, how does this work in Compose? Well, are you guys working in Android Studio and it looks like this new UI? This is the new UI that IntelliJ created.
I'm only on Giraffe.
Well, no, it's available now. It's been available for a while.
In the latest
So-
draft, it's available and it's an opt-in.
Yeah, you have to turn it on in order for it to work. But it sort of removes a lot of the overhead that you used to see. And you can see that they kind of have this Visual Studio Code icon style side menu here. So your logcat, your problems, terminal, get, repos, whatever. And then if you want to access all of your standard stuff, like I have it turned on like that. So I can still get to it, but it's all hidden.
Does the canary show where you can turn on and off?
It does. So if you see the gear in the upper right corner by my picture, I'm pointing for the people in the room, not for you guys, but for you guys, I can do it like this. If you see right here, because I can draw on my screen, that is the where you get to the settings. So you can press here and you get to the settings, the SDK manager, all the stuff. But here you can see right there, without going into the settings, you can switch back to the traditional UI, or classic as they like to call it.
Do you remember how to do it? I don't know.
Well, if you want to do it from the SDK or from the settings, you go into settings, you go into appearance, and right there where you have new UI. So I have a zoom in capability. You can see right there, you can go in here and then there you go. You can even do this where it says show main menu in a separate toolbar. So you can actually make it go vertically instead of across. I think I have that set on my stable one at home on my other machine. If anybody wants to know how I'm doing the Zoom stuff, I can show you, I can tell you about that later. It's a separate install. It's a Microsoft product, believe it or not. It's called Zoom It. Google it or Bing it or whatever you do. Okay. So I need to close this application so I can open up the other one. So just bear with me a moment as we have a little bit of what they call that. It doesn't matter. Okay, so let me load up this one here. The cool thing about the emulator is I don't have to restart it and turn it off. It's still running. Hopefully my machine doesn't puke on me here, but I'll let it finish loading. You can see we still have it right here. So just to show you that I did do this in Compose. The Compose version looks only different by color. It's purple instead of green. Now, I actually didn't even show you the theming inside the XML. We know where it's at. It's in an XML file, and you have a series of things. The theming for this is not in the XML. There's an XML in there that tells you what it's supposed to do, like from an action bar. That's it. In fact, there is a bug that I noticed. I don't think it's a bug so much as not having a certain version of material installed, because I couldn't switch to a specific one in order to get what I wanted, because it showed up as like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's not there. And it was one of the material ones. I had to switch to the default. Now there is the other bug in this, as you can see here, is I can't get this to switch to white. Now, I spent a little bit of time trying to make that work. It does, however, work in the other demo I'm going to show you later. But for some reason, I'll show you the code for this. There's some code specific for the status bar that's supposed to flip between dark and light. But it does it backwards, essentially because you can see that this is dark. But if I switch the phone to dark mode, it actually fixes itself. It's kind of weird. But it's the same app. You can see I press on it. I can put in some numbers, and I get back conversion. Same thing down here, although that one looks a little squished. Yeah, it's a little squished. I'll have to fix that later. But you can see here, we get the temperature. We have the list, just like we did before. Might look a little bit different, maybe a little extra space in there, but it's the same thing. Now, all of these icons that you see here on the XML are PNG files, traditional, normal. But would you believe that those are not? I don't have those in here. In fact, I'll show you. They're not in there. I'll show you how I got those. That's the only Material 3 thing that I have in this particular app. This one's mostly running Material 2. And you can kind of see a comparison side by side between the XML and the Compose one. So that one has a little bit higher, one's a little bit taller. Come on now. Not that one. I'm trying to make them go away.
Mine just has more
Go.
padding. Your Compose one looks to have a little bit more vertical padding in the card. Probably
Whoops, I just took a screenshot for no reason.
It's for the future.
Right? Now, and as you can see, and I'll open the files here a little bit, there is only one activity in here. I'm going to hide this for now. And the activity, as it loaded up, you actually can get a preview too, which will, no, just give me the code. I have to wait for this thing to load. Sorry, my computer is puttering along. This thing's a 2019 laptop, so what you can see here is that your set content, there's no XML. You have a sort of theme thing that you pick, and then you execute whatever you want to execute. Now, you'll notice I have some lint suppressants here, unused material scaffold padding parameter. It has to do with scaffold. There's a scaffold in here that handles the top bar, the bottom bar, and the content in the middle. And this is a composable function. I don't have the reasoning behind this error, but it's there, and it doesn't, you notice it didn't crash, so it works. That's all that matters, right? So we're going to first look at bars. What is bars? So bars is one of the first composable functions. You can see we're using an annotation here. This annotation is what tells the compiler that this is a composable function. But you notice that it's a standard function. It has a standard name function. You can pass in parameters. You can have returns, whatever you want. Although sometimes they will bar catch you if you try to use some of that stuff. But that's IntelliJ, I think, more than anything. We also have these sort of remembering things. So there's ways to have it handle responses. So here it says, creates a navhost control that handles the adding of compose navigation and dialog navigator. So basically it remembers stuff for you. So no more that save instant state type stuff that we had in XML. There's remembers that help do that on our behalf, which is great. This is the scaffold that caused the suppressive lint. So a scaffold, in a sense, has a lot. Well, here, maybe if I do this, it has a lot of parameter arguments that you can use to do all of these things. You'll see there's some stuff with drawers, floating action buttons, anything that you would normally do on a screen, you can access. Now, the ones that I'm accessing is the top bar and the bottom bar. And there is a section in there called content. You can see it at the very bottom. The content is where everything in the middle goes. But if you had to add a floating action button, then you already have a spot for it. It's in its own little space. So you don't have to reinvent anything. It's all right there. So I have a top bar. This is that first piece in here, right? So it's right there. And there are a few different bars to choose from. The top app bar is the standard one where it's left justified. And there's like, I want to say there's like 4 or 5 different ones. You pick the one that best suits what you're doing. You can still add things like a nav drawer and all that stuff, even with this one. And so what you'll notice with Compose is that things start layering in code as opposed to XML layering in XML elements. So this is sort of the style that's used. To me, it's a little bit like I kind of want to fix it and make it a little more my style, but I do this the way that it wants me to do it. So in the top bar, you can see I have a title, and that's the Compose demo. And it was that thing that was at the top that you saw, the text that says Compose demo. And right from the get-go, I can immediately color it whatever I want. Now, in this case, I'm using the built-in color scheme, just color and then say white. But if I wanted it to follow themes, I could say material theme.colors.primary, secondary, and all that. I didn't do that with this one, but you'll notice that the ones underneath it background color, content color, and elevation. I set the elevation to 0 because I didn't want any shadows. Originally, when I did this, I actually had the middle of the app, the same color. Everything was all the same color. It was an off-white, so the action bar and the status bar were all the same color. I changed it later to the blue because I was fighting this color scheme a little bit too much. And so I just like, you know what, I'm just going to make it the primary, which is what the primary color is. And then the secondary variant is that sort of off-white. But I still kept the elevation set to 0 because I didn't really want a shadow. Because the card, where the card was positioned, I thought it was better if it didn't have a shadow. The card does have a shadow, though. But inside the content section is essentially where I put, it says bottom nav. It's more of the center stuff because the actual bottom bar has the bottom navigation. So unlike what we did in XML, where you had to kind of go through these layers of things, this is layers of Kotlin. I don't know if you could say one's better than the other, but this is probably a little more readable than all those properties inside the layers of XML. So like, here's one element, one icon, one text. Here's another one. Now you'll notice that this is not calling anything inside of the drawable. And that's because these icons are material icons. And so you can call them and they'll just pull themselves in through the dependency injection. So we don't have to worry about storing them at all, which is great. I can't say the same for XML. I tried doing material 3 injection and it just did not work. I mean, it did work, but it didn't work because I couldn't get the resource thing to pick up on it. I even tried some trickery function writing to get it to work because I can do it with other techniques. I just couldn't get it to work with material, no matter how much I tried, because it brings back a drawable and those resources are looking for int values. So you can't really convert one to the other, no matter how much research you do. And of course, we have a click event here that takes the navigation control and just takes it to where it needs to go. So that's sort of those navigations. So you can see the route says, this sort of tells you where it's supposed to go by name. And so, yeah, so if I hover over route, it doesn't actually tell me anything, but we hover over, sometimes these things will tell you stuff and sometimes they won't. Anyway, so going to the bottom, the happily named bottom nav, which probably should have been named something else. Actually, yeah, here's where the actual click events happen. So convert and in my list. So convert is the one you saw with the two things. It's the first one, so it just automatically launches. You can see we have a start. Based off of this, where it says start destination. Where's my little? Oh, here it is. No, not that one. You can see I have some padding set in place here, kind of give that some general size. But now I've seen demos where they didn't have any composable functions in the activity. This was sort of already there. It was kind of one of those ones. So it's, I would say it's up to the developer whether they want to put any composable functions in the activity. Because you notice that the activity actually ends here. It's this everything it's underneath. So it doesn't really matter. And that's the beauty of composable functions in a way, is because they're functions not tied to any direct class. So they can be anywhere. There is this thing here called a default preview. So you notice here it says preview show background is true. So with this active, I can tell it what I want to see. So when I do switch over to a split, and I don't like that split. Why did it do it that way? You got a
Is the icon over to the left of that bottom window? No.
No. It's not wanting to, well, it doesn't really matter. It's okay. I'll figure it out. It's colorblind mode. Yeah, there's some kind of way to make this. I'll just show you this way. So basically, you can actually see what it looks like. So you can get a preview from the actual Kotlin code, which is kind of neat. But it all depends on this one annotation. Now, there are some times where you'll be working on a UI screen and it won't look right because it's only showing you the piece that you're building. It's not showing everything. So you just kind of have to play with that a little bit. But the one thing that helps, and I'm going to shrink this a little bit, is the idea that you can actually fix stuff while the emulator's running. Now, this was added into the stable branch, and it'll come up on the slide when I switch back to it in a little bit. But if I run this app here, and hopefully this does not mess my machine up. So let me see here. Because there actually is an issue with this app that I want to fix. Or at least it was the first time I did the demo. So we'll see what happens here. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody from the chat over there? Okay. Now, this particular demo is strictly made for a phone. I didn't make it for anything else because it was just showing the comparison between the XML version and this version. I do have a third demo, which goes into the other stuff. So you're going to see it working on a tablet, working on a foldable. I don't have any of those devices here. We have to do everything through emulator. Although if I had my cord, I could actually show you on my phone. Now, this feature that we're going to show where it auto updates on the fly, what was the term they called it? Active live edit. It does work on a phone too, so it's not just an emulator, which is kind of neat. So you can see that it's running. You can see right here as I zoom in where it says up to date. This is where you're going to see it say it's behind or something like that, and all you have to do is hit that, and it will change. Now, one of the things that was broken was the fact that I entered in numbers there and you can't see it. It's in the wrong color, which means I have to fix it. So what I need to do that is go into the correct UI screen. So I have all of my UI in its own folder. So I go into the convert UI and let's see if I can find it. Because I'm pretty sure, well, I know where it's at. It's just a matter of getting to it. So I'm kind of scrolling through. So we have, this is the text label. So that's the label at the top there. This is enter value. You'll notice here that we're using what's called column and rows. These are the replacements for linear and relative layout. The only thing that I've noticed is that from my perspective, they're backwards. The columns act like rows and the rows act like columns. And I don't know why, but I just noticed that whenever I would be stacking stuff, because I'm thinking of like Excel and the way columns work going down, but columns actually work the opposite direction. And that really freaked my mind out the first time that I noticed that. So you can see we've got the radio button down here. So that's the radio button. You notice that there's no group. There's no radio group at all. That's one of the things we're able to eliminate is the need to have a group around controls. So we have a radio button. And the reason that it works, as you can see here, it's got whether it's selected or not selected, they're sort of tied to each other.
Hoisting, isn't that what it's called?
What's that?
Hoisting the state.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that.
So you can see I'm controlling the colors for each one of these. This is using the material theme. Now this is material 2, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Material 2 doesn't have the number 2, it just says material, but material 3 has 3 in it. Yeah. So what we're looking for is the entry point. So this is the entry point. I named it. Basically, I tried separating some of these out, so it wasn't one like super huge function. But you can see that the outline text field has a focus color of primary. So that's the border around it. You can see where we have the keyboard options. This is also where I set the keyboard function for done, which trying to do that in XML well, if I remember correctly, you can't do it in XML. You have to define it in Kotlin instead, which I didn't show, but you can see that it's here. And whenever that done happens, we get, first I convert it to a double, and then I actually do a result stuff. So I have a result to string, and this is a method or a function that I have that gives me what I need. But what we need to find is the entry text. Now, both entry texts are also broken color-wise. So, looking at what you see here, is it anywhere there where I can change it? It's me asking you. I'm not saying I don't know how, I'm just asking you.
Probably the edit text somewhere. What's the comment? I think the modifier.
You putting them on, yeah. Can you
Well,
hover
so
over
so
the
this,
outline text field?
Or is it?
right? You mean this one right here?
Code.
So here, let me zoom in so you can see that
There you
better.
go.
You can see the very first one is actually what it is. It's called text color. So all I have to do is come in here, and I'll just enter in and say text color. Now, granted, I have to do this first. So it's text color. And all I have to do is give it a color. Now, for this one, I don't have to do anything fancy. But what I could do is say something like material and use the material. I'm sorry. It's color. Color equals material. I'm doing this on the fly. It's been a minute. So.
Are you just using material theme colors on primary?
Yeah. Well, I guess it should be just like that, right? Material theme mather. Okay. Now I can't spell. Material theme. Yeah, I probably just didn't have it fully spelled. And I could actually set it to primary too. And the primary is that purple color. And then I have to put a comma. So everything is comma separated, just like any other parameter being passed in. Now, the good news is you can see in the upper right corner that it says out of date. Now, all I have to do is just select that, and it will make it correct. There are times where it still has to relaunch the activity and start over. There's nothing we can really do about that. It all depends on the state of where it's at the time. So now if I come in here, I can now see what I'm doing. Now, I'm going to show you guys something else real quick. I'm going to take that out because I'm going to have a little fun here. I'm going to do it in here, and I'm also going to do it in the other one. One of the reasons why I installed Canary for this demo is because they introduced StudioBot. Now, I'm going to talk about this when we get into what's new in Compose in the slides, but StudioBot was one of the things that they added that's sort of like an AI helper, all right? And I've used it reluctantly because I tried to stay away from the AI stuff, but I actually like this one because it actually did some stuff for me. Well, it helped me in a way when I was making the demo that I'll show you later. But you have to enable it to use it. Now it's sitting right over here. You can see, and in order to use it, you have to log in with an account. Like I'm logged in with my Gmail account as opposed to my GDG account. And so I can come in here and ask it a question that's related to my project. It's not here to do like ChatGPT and just give you a whole bunch of stuff about nothing. This is very focused on your project. So if I say something like, how do I change the color in my outlined text box to my primary theme? So something like that. So I ask it, how do I do this thing? And it should give me somewhat of an answer, whether it's a good answer or not. And it's getting ready to spit out some code, which it's done only a couple of times. That's not the right answer, but it was at least willingness to give me something. Like the second example there is using traditional R, which is not right. The top one, still not right, but at least it gave me something.
So one thing I thought was interesting, it's outlining text box and actual class name, because your class is outlining.
Yeah, it's a text. Well, this is the actual thing. It's text field defaults. And then this is remember it was the second, it was the style of this text input box.
So the
So
class that you're using is called outline text field, not box.
Oh,
So I was really
yeah.
curious if it was going to hallucinate and like actually come up with an answer that's totally wrong. I'm just curious if outline text box is an actual class and it gives an answer for that class, or if it
what about outlined text field? Give me the same answer.
Cody.
Now, if you actually want to see it do actually give you a real answer, how do I use, or no, how do I implement JSON? Like we all know what the answer is, right? You have to add a dependency. That's exactly what it told me. Not only did it tell me I have to implement the dependency, but then it actually told me how I can do some JSON stuff in it. And so,
Does it do it for you, or it just tells you?
no, it just tells you that it might evolve to doing stuff for you, but it can definitely help you. So when I show you the next demo here in a little bit, I ran into an issue that I could not figure out, and I couldn't find any documentation for it. And it was driving me crazy for about an hour. And when I finally went to StudioBot and asked it to tell me, it pointed me in the right direction. It gave me a dependency implementation, which I didn't even think about, but it gave me an outdated one. And what they did is they moved this specific library to a different spot. And I found it later, about an hour later. But it got me into the right mindset to get me to like, oh yeah, duh, it's an implementation. It's like, because I was using a Google example to do the list detail style that I was trying to do. I'll talk about that in a moment. But I just want to show you a little bit about StudioBot here, just to see if it would tell me the right answer. I suppose if I refined it and said text field defaults or no, outline text field, right? That was what I said, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's your second.
Yeah. It's not perfect. It's still sort of a work in progress.
you definitely still have to be good at prompt engineering to do that.
But I have to do this basically the same text color. The good news is I only had to do it once, because if I come into here and do it, oh, come on, I have to read. Am I actually in there? Let me see. I thought I had that on its own. I guess I didn't. So I'll probably have to duplicate that. I thought I had this set up. Demo entry 1. That means I have a second one down here, doesn't it? I think I had to do some different stuff with that one, so that's why I didn't use it. At any rate, just kind of going through and showing this This is one file, and it has to do with just that one screen. So the process that I went through when I made this is that I put everything in one function just to get it to work. And then from there, I started extracting things into their own functions. And when I did that, I also had to worry about all of these things. These are mutated states where they sort of remember things on your behalf. The instant save state stuff that I talked about earlier. And so some of these, it didn't quite work when I had to pass things down from one to another. So I still think I can manipulate this even more and make them even more refined, but it would take a little more time. One of the things you'll notice about specific things like cards or any other objects that you're going to produce, whether it's buttons or cards or anything, they all have the ability to use a modifier. And this is where we can set things like padding and margin. We don't have to do all that crazy stuff that we had to do before in XML. A simple tag that says fill the max width of the screen. Well, we know what that was, right? We had wrap content and we had fill, which fill got deprecated, and then it went to match parent. So by doing match parent, that means you have to manipulate the tree of all the maps and all the, and it was kind of a pain to figure that out. But the good news is in here, everything is right there in front of you. Now, I didn't have any buttons to show downstate, but you can do all of that in Compose without having to create a special XML file. You can actually create those states. That was just the one thing that I didn't put in any of the demos that I wish I would have. But every row can have some kind of manipulation in columns and stuff. So if you don't use rows and columns in a card is like a surface. A surface means everything is stacked on top of each other. So you're forced to sort of use row and columns to distribute evenly how the things are laid on the screen. So that's one of those things you have to worry about when you're working in Compose. There is a surface type that's called surface that does the same thing, but things like a card is treated like a surface, so you have to row, column that stuff. Now this is the convert. Now remember, I had a list before, right? So if I look at the list UI, I'll be honest, I went a little bit lazy on this, and I don't mean, how did I just do that? Now there is a list called a lazy list or lazy or something like that. I did not use that here because there's only 10 items, and lazy lists is what you use to it's a list style that helps you with memory management between when you're dealing with large volumes of content. I felt like it was an overkill for a simple 10 list thing. So all I have is this little vertical scroll thing. It does have a small state in it, but that's it. There's no lazy list items at all. I have a standard for each. So nothing complicated about that list. There's no adapters in here either, not a single one, which is actually a very good thing because back in those early days, I had to, we all know about writing adapters. You're having to pass tons of information from a fragment to the adapter and then back again. I learned a lot about interfaces working in that environment before I actually fully understood what interfaces were even used for, because it was the only way to pass data back and forth between these things and then still passing it back to the activity without having to use intent returns instead. But none of that exists here. It's all just here because everything's a function.
That's my favorite thing about Jetpack Compose. Never having to do another recycler view.
Yeah, there is no recycler views in here at all because remember, this is, they got rid of all of that overhead. And instead, they have these simple things. Now, I said before, I built this one first, and then I went and did the XML version. So you can see that the list has a card, just like the other one did. And here is my clickable state where it's supposed to give you a toast message. So maybe that's why. I don't think I had a toast message in the other one, and that's why I didn't give it to me. Because I know here, if I click on this, I get a toast message. So I must have forgot to put the toast message in the other one because I was rushing just to get the list ready. But speaking of which, I mentioned before about material icons, right? So in this, all of these are not PNG files that are stuck inside the app, which reduce so by not having them in there, you reduce the overhead of the file size, right? Well, here's the icon for this thing, I believe. Oh, actually, no. Let me show you here. In the, I believe it's this one. They're all defined within my data class. So I'm using a data class and a list of as a simple way of putting this together. I define them by icon using material. You can see it's using material. This is material 2. And I picked the filled version of it. You can't see the previews here, but I mean you can see them when you look at them here. And I just picked random ones. There's no direct relationship between them and the actual content because it's a sample. But I had simple strings. Now I could have taken these. I could have put them in the strings XML. It's not the purpose of this demo. Because you might get this information from somewhere else, which is what the next demo will show. And then just to show you the calculate code, these are just standard functions. This is standard math. It's nothing too over the top. The only extra thing I added was rounding because I was getting some really weird decimal point values for conversions. So I just created this little format thing. Nothing fancy there. But so you have your icon, your spacer, and your column. So this icon tells it where it needs to go. So here, and I'll zoom in here, you can see it takes in an image vector. So it doesn't take a drawable. It doesn't take just a standard image. It takes an image vector. So that's why it's able to pull in those material icons, because I gave it the same exact type. And that's actually the material type. It comes back as an image vector. Your content description, standard stuff for accessibility, and of course, modifiers. And then I have 2 text. That's it. A little spacer, nothing to it. Very, very simple UI. A lot less overhead than what we had in XML. Standard toast message, nothing crazy there. So any questions coming through? No? Okay. So as I said, this was sort of just a compare. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
How do you explain any way to integrate with the view models in this?
So that is a good question. So when I was working on, when I worked on the XML and I took one of the built-in things, it puts stuff in a view model. So view models are used for data binding. You don't need that here.
You can use flows, which I think is the pattern. Like you can have a view model that manages state with a flow, and the UI will collect.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you can't use one, but you can. But I mean, I took the easy route with this by just using a standard data class as opposed to a view model.
Okay, yeah, because you suppose that the view model, let's say if we need to make an API call, so we need a starting point to make that call, So
right,
where would be like the good practice to make that first call? For example, if we need to make that call the moment that we load the screen, or let's say Java screen, in this case, the compose. So what would be maybe a good practice to trigger that call? Yeah, I mean, you have any suggestion?
Yeah, so none of my demos actually reach out to the internet at all. So I would say you could probably stick with the standard business logic models that you're using. You would just feed it into the compose.
Usually, in the regular way, not compose, we make the code, in on create or on resume,
Right.
But now with this new.
You can observe life cycle methods in a compose.
Uh-huh.
And so you can have a life cycle method trigger that.
Okay.
You could do on a knit. You could, instantiate a view model within the compose method, and you can maybe make that call on a knit when you do when the view model is instantiated in the init block.
Mhm.
And so there's lots of options, but I think the best way to get, and like Google's recommended way to use the view model to change the UI state, the values that are being used to render the compose is through a flow and and then there's that collect as state is something you can do within it. And so you collect those flows as state and then refer to that state and all those parameters, just like what Roger's doing. But that's
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'll talk about in a moment when we switch back to the slides is they introduced a couple of new flow components. I didn't use them, but basically flow columns and flow rows. So it's something new. I don't think it's on the stable branch yet. I think it's might be in the beta or whatnot. I don't have a huge amount of info. It was in the blog, so I saw it and added it in.
I haven't used the flow, but I'm now in question. So is that flow similar to live data? Is similar, I mean, the way that it works underneath?
Oh, I don't know how it works underneath, but it is definitely an observer type pattern.
Similar way,
Yeah.
yeah.
How are we doing time-wise?
Maybe 20-ish minutes.
All right, so this is pretty much all I wanted to show here, minus the themes. Let me show you the themes. So we have our traditional XML, I think it's values. We have the standard theme system here. This is the same one that you use in XMLs. You'll see here that this is set to the default device default with no action bar. I can't access material from here. I'm not sure why. It might be the build target or something that I have it set and it's just not allowing me. So I have it set at the device's default, which is fine. But where you actually set it is in these functions here. So I have, they introduced the idea of light and dark theming. And so basically you have access to the various pieces here, primary variant, secondary. There is a limit on the material 2. They expanded it really large in material 3. I don't have a graphic for it. I saw a video and yeah, they really went all out on material 3 when it comes to the theming. But you can see here, I say things like primary color. I define my own, but these are all basically, these are all just defined values. And they're using this sort of hexadecimal style output, or long, if you will. Of course, it includes transparency, which is what I have. These are all solid. They're not gonna like get weird on me or anything. But I did define a few of my own, and these were sort of the ones that came with it. And then I played around with some color ideas. So that's why you have a purple. That's why I have a gray and a few different shades of gray. The green is in here too. So the same colors I had on the XML one is in here. So I used all of the same colors. I chose purple as the primary for this one and green for the primary of the other one. But you get access to these particular things. Now, if you remember, I showed you the status bar and then the piece underneath the navigation drawer. Those are done with this one statement right here. I had to do a side effect, and based off of whether or not it's a light status bar will determine whether these things change. And they're set to primary and primary variant. Purple and white or off-white. So if it switches to a dark theme, which I didn't even show, I can easily go in here and change this to a dark theme. You go in, you wait 10 seconds for it to load. You switch it to dark theme. Come on, cooperate. There we go. Oh. If I switch back to the app and it reloads, it's going to shift to dark mode. And so now everything's dark. Now I did set the purple to stay, and I manipulated the background instead. The cards are now gray instead of white. And you'll notice that this bottom down here is now purple too. It was white before. It matched whatever this is set to.
Is that pixel? Is that a pixel specific feature of the dark theme?
No.
Okay.
Well, it's Android 13, I want to say. I don't know if it was before that.
It was on Android before 13. I don't remember exactly when that was
It's like on the Samsung, they don't have that.
The modern Samsung definitely should.
Yeah, we didn't have that setting.
It may be in a different location.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have been known to kind of put their own stuff in their own places, right?
I know it is at least part of like Android packages is delivered to Samsung, but I don't know exactly where it's in.
But I kind of wanted to show you that one piece and so we can end this demo. So I'm going to close this project because we're going to open up another one here in a minute. And I'm going to shift over to here now. You can see the slide deck. Okay. So we're going to start kind of talking briefly about what is new in Compose, and then I have one more demo to show. Hopefully you guys can read that. Just let me know if you can't see it. I can zoom in, as you know. But there were performance improvements. They added support for emojis. So now you can access emojis in the keyboard, I believe. They added some features in there for that. New page components that support horizontal and vertical flip through content. There's the flow that I was talking about before, flow row and flow column. I haven't actually tried them yet because I didn't know they were in there until I read the article later. Live edit, which allows you to quickly iterate the code of the emulator. I did show you guys how that worked. It didn't automatically update. It did sort of relaunch, but it didn't have to relaunch the entire thing. It just sort of did a partial restart. Support for new animations. So I don't have any animations in mind, but unless they're built-in ones. Compose Preview now supports live updates across multiple files. So that's the preview stuff. It's a little hard to show on here, but it's you're supposed to be able to have different like views. Like when I had the view window open earlier, and you can see the screen, you can actually have it like show different ones and kind of see how it flows. They did demo that, I think, at I/O. Improved autocomplete behavior with the typing stuff. Studio Bot, which I did show you how that worked, even though it failed in one but passed in the other. There is emulator support for the Pixel Fold and the tablet. I do have those emulators. I will try to get them running. We'll see how much time we have here. There is this thing called New Espresso Device API that lets you apply rotation changes. So within the emulator, you can simulate, at least with the Pixel Fold, whether it's folded, partway open, or open. Now, when it's partway open, it looks the same visually as if it was fully open. Now, the one thing that I could not get it to do with my app is I couldn't get it to open like this, where it's an L, and actually have one and one, and it looked right. It still looks the traditional way, like I need to turn it. Now, if I manipulate the code enough, I could probably fix the problem, but I was up till 1:30 this morning trying to get that demo working, so there is that. Material 3 has been updated. They updated the components. There's a lot of component changes that you'll notice between 3 and 2, like things like radio buttons or sliders. They all look different now. They're a little more full. and a little less bloated from what I could remember from some of the videos that I looked at. So you will notice some differences between those components. Now, I can't say as to whether or not mine will fully render in Material 3, but I had some pretty good stuff in there. And then the next one, Extended Compose for more surface. Okay, so the idea of supporting other devices, tablets, foldables, televisions. You'll notice the Compose for TV is listed here. Compose for Wear OS now is a thing. I don't have a demo for those. But the thing here says observes devices window size. And this is the demo part that I'm going to show you in a minute, is that we no longer, like back in the XML days, we had to have XML layouts set up for different screen resolutions based off of density level. That was the best way to do it, at least when I worked at Sprint. And it was a nightmare having these layouts duplicated amongst all of these different folder structures and then having to create the right density pixel for the right thing, because we had designers down our throats saying, move pixel pushing stuff around the screen. And then Samsung brings out a device that completely goes against the entire evolution of the way phones were made. If anybody remembers the Samsung Mega phone, the Sprint one was a really large screen. What was considered a large screen at that time is now a normal size screen. But the resolution was the direct opposite of what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be really high resolution, and it wasn't. And it made designing terrible. I spent hours trying to get the Sprint Zone, the bloated app that nobody used, to work properly on it. Because every time I fixed it, I had to go check 20 other devices to make sure that they didn't change. And I had to build a special view just for that phone. Yeah. Anyway, getting a little off the rails here. We have the thing called Glance. It says, lets you design widgets optimized for Android's phones, tablets, and foldables, home screens using Compose. I haven't messed with Glance unless I have and didn't realize it. But it is one of the features. I did say Wear OS. Compose for Wear is 1.1 stable and 1.2 currently in the alpha build, like what I have here. And it says for living rooms, they added Compose for TV. So I don't know anybody who's doing anything for Android TV, but if you do, you can now use Compose. And the last piece of this is support for other libraries. So Google Maps now has support for Compose, so you can use Compose to build Google Maps and some of the stuff. I don't know that much about all of the components that it supports in there, but I'm pretty sure from the article, which the article is on here, I'm pretty sure they talked about markers and various other things for Google Maps. There's this thing called a glide library, which I don't know anything about, but it was listed on there, so I put it on there. But basically, they added some developer library support for Compose, so that way people could start building custom controls. So all of this came from the Android blog link that I have here. You guys will be able to get access to the slide notes after we're done, so you'll be able to get to it, including the links to all of my demos today are all up on GitHub. So with that, I'm now going to show you my last demo. Now, this one is using Material 3. It's using adaptive layouts and dynamic theming. So I had the same theme that I had in the previous one with dark and light theme. I didn't change any of the colors from when the app was created. So it's a lot of weird pinkish purple colors, but you don't see any of it because dynamic theming means it takes it from whatever image you have on your desktop. So whatever wallpaper you're using, the code will adapt itself. It's a really cool feature. I have it on my Pixel phone. I don't know if it's available on Samsung or any of the other ones, but I'm going to show you this now. So switching back to here, I'll load up this one. Now, I had this app done at like 8:30 last night. but that was before I tried to make it work on a tablet. I had it working fully on a phone using 2 activities. It was a sample that I found that showed me, that kind of brought me up to speed on trying to do this, because I was so used to the old way of doing it in XML, where you have fragment manipulation. I'm like, well, how am I going to do this with Compose? So the technique that they used was using a second activity that basically drove the index of whatever you selected, and it would just bring it up. That way did not work when you add tablets in there, because it wasn't designed to accommodate for the different sizes. And this is where we're going to sort of look at how do you handle that. So I had to undo all of that. Well, I only had to undo the parts of it that dealt with the activity. So before we get too far, I need to turn off this. Well, let me show you the app running, if I can get this thing to cooperate with me. So this is based off of, anybody who knows me knows that I've used this sample many times, and it is the U.S. state birds. This was an app that I actually wrote for Windows Phone and published a millennia ago, like a decade ago. But it's every state. So we're talking 50 states. So you can see it's a nice long list. You'll also notice that this is blue up here. I'm using a different app bar declaration, by the way. But if I select one of these, I get a nice, beautiful photo, and I get some demographic information. You'll notice at the bottom that I set that nav piece to match the color of whatever the top state is. And I did that on purpose. There's no bottom navigation at all in this app. It's just focused on this. There's no buttons here either, so it all works on standard gestures. But that's it. It's very simple in the way it looks and the way it acts. Now, that color scheme is based off of whatever the wallpaper is. So you notice this blue right here. That's what it picked up on. So if I was to come in here and change the color of the wallpaper, or not. Try that again. Never mind. If I change the wallpaper, it will literally change the background. And you'll see, because inside of all of my repos on the README are screenshots that I took of the app on my desktop at home. So you're going to see that it's not blue on that one. It's a different shade of something else, a red or orange or whatever it was that I had on there. But I'm going to turn that off for now. And you can see I have, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see I have the Pixel Fold and the Pixel Tablet. Now, I'm only going to load up one of these because I think we're going to come up on time here. So which one would you guys like to see? The tablet or the Fold?
Which one would you like to show us?
It doesn't matter to me. Anybody in the audience there? Sorry. Okay, so I'm going to load up the tablet. And the reason I'm going to load up the tablet is they put a nice fancy thing that you can actually see that looks like a pixel. When they did the Fold, they didn't do the UI, so it just looks like a big giant square, a rectangle. So I'll have this thing sort of load in the background while we're looking at the code part. Now you can see I have one activity. Let me zoom in there. You can see one activity. That's it. I have helper UI. That, now I do have an assets folder just to show you where the data comes from. It's a JSON. Now, one of the things that I didn't show in the other apps, but I will show in this one, is the fact that this is not using traditional Gradle. It is using Kotlin instead, which was a challenge when it comes to implementing libraries. So at the bottom here, this is how it does it now. So you have to figure out, well, how the hell do I make that work? Well, what they did is they just added an extra layer. So you'll see that I have, where is it? You can see I have JSON right here. Remember I talked about JSON? Well, I figured out how to do this later. But basically you create a library thing in here in this Tom file. You give it a name. Here's where you give it the actual com dots. Then you give it a connecting name and then a version reference. And so up here is where I say what version of JSON I have running, which is 2.10.1. I think it's the newest. But what you'll also see at the top here is I have adaptive layouts running. And this is how I'm doing my list detail, which I'll show you in a minute. But I'm running version 27. Originally, what I got from StudioBot was an implementation that is no longer being used. Because it told me, well, it tells me version 19, they deprecated this particular thing. And I'm like, why the hell did they do that? Because the code that they used, the code sample that they had is no longer valid. At least as far as the imports. The code was fine, but I had to fix the import. And that's where I had to figure that out. So adaptive layouts took care of that. But I was having a hell of a time. And you can see this is why, because it's a Google library called the Accompanist. But it went from, it actually said com.google, and then it had something else here instead. And it was version 0.18. Had nothing to do with this one, but it had, that code used to exist in a library that they were using, but apparently that sample is no longer, the imports are bad, like I said. So anyway, how much time do I got? 10 minutes?
Sure.
Okay.
We have
Okay. So just to show you the activity here, we'll make this as quick as possible. This one has very limited UI in it. Like I did before, one of the things that let me go up here. One of the things that you'll notice is I have this thing called calculated window size class and calculated display features. These are two things that you sort of need to have in order to make the system figure out whether or not you're on a phone, a tablet, or a foldable. Now, you will see an opt-in. I had to opt into this experimental material 3 window size class API. And then you'll see there's a required API of Tiramisu, which is the current one that I'm using for the demos here. Just some things that we had to add in to make this work. This actually has to do with something that is not related to the UI directly. It's a technique that I used to use. Well, I'll show you what that is. It's in my helper here. State birds. So I have a data class. You'll notice that I use the serialized name. This is a JSON thing. It is serializable, which I had to turn that on. And this is a standard function that I have written for years about how to get a list of a class and have JSON do the reading for me and all that. I had a Java version of it, so I had to figure out the Kotlin interpretation for that. But this is something that I knew about, and I had to find it in my archives. The JSON, just so you can see the JSON here, does not actually have the image in it. What it has is the name of the file. The PNG name is there. So what this does is this takes that name and matches it to the drawable folder. And so this get identifier with the package name is why I have to go with Tiramisu, because they deprecated the base level one. I don't know why, but I was like, okay, I had to put a package name in there because this get identifier.
Lens suppression to discouraged API. I don't think I've ever seen that one before.
That's the reason it was discouraging me. They don't want you using this to call a drawable in order to access something. So you could call it a hack if you want, or I think that's what they're calling it. They're saying I'm hacking their stuff. But all I'm telling them to do is like just match the folder with the name, the string that I'm going to send you, and just give me it back as an int value, because it's the direct int RID int that I need in order to set the value. Cute little thing that I've had that I've used for years with this, and I did this like 7 or 8 years ago. I had this in there in Java, so I know it worked, and because I had to translate the Java version in order to make that function work. But anyway, so I had to pass in that window size, and this is a display feature. This says description of a physical feature on the display. A display feature is a distinctive physical attribute located within the display panel of the device. It can intrude into the application window space and create a visual distortion. So these are these two things that I passed in up here. These things right here: calculated display feature, which is a list, and then window size class. So these things are being used a little bit farther down. But you can see instead of using top bar, I used center aligned. That's why it's centered instead of left justified. I don't have an action. I don't have like a hamburger button. So I was like, yeah, let's try this one instead. And like the other ones, I have my text. I set the max line to 1. I didn't want it wrapping around. Not that it would anyway, but I put that in there for the heck of it. And then for the colors, I set the color to the primary. Content, just like before, but there's no bottom nav. There's no bottom navigation, so I didn't need it. Here we have a simple column and a surface. I set the surface to the max size, take up as much room as you can. And here I'm also passing those same two things down because this is where I actually had to, if I remember right, it's where I had to use it. I'm not using the default preview. I had to turn it off because of the way that this is layered. It just doesn't quite want to cooperate. But that's the only thing I have in here, this one composable. So everything else is out here. So in the UI, I have the themes. So I'll show you the theme real quick. Again, we have light and dark theme. I didn't change it. I left it the way it was because I was betting on the whole idea of that dynamic theming system. And so that is where this comes into play. This is that same method as before, but it actually works. So I don't know, maybe it's just written differently because the other one, actually, no, this is it right here. Sorry. This is the one that was in the previous one I showed. But then there's this thing here that says is appearance, light status bar, sets it to there. So that's good. But this is the dynamic piece right here. I'm sorry. That's the dynamic piece. So if the build version supports it, then it will allow you to dynamically go based off of whether it's a wallpaper or not. I think you can control that within the phone rather than the app. The app will just respond accordingly. So I didn't really have to change much there. And I didn't have to change any of the colors. So I have the bird UI here. This is the start, where remember I passed in the window and the display. I have some remember states. We know what those are. Those help remember things, especially if you do changes. And then here's where we start manipulating. So we have to understand if the detail screen is open or not. That's that picture with the list. Is it open? Set it whether it is open or not. When the window size class, this determines whether it's compact, which is the phone, the medium, which is the flip, or the expanded, which is the tablet. So it uses this way of determining which one it's supposed to do. And based on that, it will either bring up both up or just one of them up. see, we kind of have, this is where we start doing selection state. Because if you remember, I said we used two activities originally where I was passing index back and forth. This is actually doing it in here. So we have the current selected bird index. And it says here, if the detail is visible and the select box index is not null, then show the selection. Otherwise, don't show it. Pretty simple. We have an on-click event that happens here, so no intents have to be floated around to make this work. And if the on the click event, which we say the detail is open and true, the detail part of it, which is this piece here, looks at that list visible. I'm kind of going through this quickly here. So again, all of the code will be up on the thing. So I had to, here's where it's still looking at the selected bird index. Now I don't have an index ID in my JSON at all. So it's creating that index based off of where it's at inside of the list itself. The lists index is what it's using. Is this my list is the list, because it got it right here. So I have this function here. I send in a context, which local context current is way better than the old app context that failed half the time. And then, there we go. So if the pick bird is not null, then it's so funny. I didn't want to put that in there, but it insisted on it. Because it was like, well, how do I know that this thing's not null? It's not going to be null. But I'll indulge the compiler anyway. So it'll launch the profile, which is the other side of the screen. We have what's called the two-pane strategy, horizontal two-pane, split the fraction with the list taking one fraction and the detail taking 3. So the detail takes most of the space. The list takes up just enough to do what it has to do. So it actually doesn't really look that much different than the normal font size. It was actually quite good. So I have the UI choice. Again, I'm passing in if this thing's open, passing in various other things here. There's a lot to go through. It was a lot of information that I had to try to put into this thing from a sample that Google had made. So here's where you start seeing things like user interaction notifications, savable state providers. It's sort of keeping track of everything as it's going through.
And this is all to handle the.
It's going to determine whether I need to show the list, then the detail, like I showed in the phone, or if it's going to side by side. Now, when I launch the app, it's not going to show the detail right out the beginning. You have to select one first. Pretty sure there's probably some small piece I could go in and make it take the first one automatically. But again, I was up quite late last night, so I probably just overlooked it. Vertical folds only. So fold aware configuration. So there's some configurations that determine whether or not it's a foldable. Now this, I think, is where I'll be able to manipulate the fold and be able to change their positions. I'll have to play around with that a little bit. But yeah, so this bird UI is where I spent time trying to figure out these imports. As you can see, these were the imports that I could not get to work. Fold aware configuration, horizontal two-pane strategy, the two-pane, and the two-pane strategy. So these are the ones that are used to do the manipulation with having side-by-side UI. As far as the rest of them go, the list UI is not really that much different. Now I did use a lazy column here. This is where we use the lazy stuff, as I mentioned before, to handle that sort of memory allocation with a long list. So the rest of it is like item indexes. It's keeping track of these indexes again. This is part of the stuff that went with the other one. But then the actual item itself is standard composable. So you have a card. So like I went with the card again. This time I made it around corners, kind of made it look fancy. So it's got a 16 dp of round corner. You couldn't do that in XML without going to a separate like system in order to create an ellipse, and it was just a complicated mess. But I just had 3 texts: name, nomenclature, and state. And then I had a bird. Now, here's the state bird piece. Here is that painter resource that I have, or here's the get drawable, where that function I told you where I needed to pass in the value. So I pass in the value. In this case, it's the thumbnail of the state. So there's 2 images in here. So just so you can see those, there's all the images between the state icon, the state ones, the actual states, and then the image, the pictures themselves. Everything's optimized, so it's not a large memory. In fact, the images aren't really that big, but they're kind of scaled up a little bit so they look right. But yeah, so the state image, very straightforward. On the other, the list detail, pretty much the same kind of thing with the image. The only difference there is I had to kind of play around with how it's scaled relative to the height, which I can show really quick here before I show you the demo. I had to play around with this a little bit. So I have this one function that gives me the info, that puts the line in the title and the thing. I couldn't do that with history because some of them I had 2 separate history pieces in the JSON. So I had to account for whether it was empty or not empty. I had to do that with the male and female too, but I did that by this bird info actually verifies whether or not the data is there or not. But the history, I combined both of them together. That's why it's a separate function, even though they sort of do the same thing. But right here, this is the actual image of the bird itself. And this is where I was messing with the scale. And we have this container height. So however big the container height is for the image will determine whether the image is huge or not huge or whatever. All right, so that's as far as I'm going to go with that because I think we need to kind of wrap this up. So let me show you the demo here. Not that. So this also has I'm pretty sure it has the same adaptive UI because I don't think I have the color set to blue. But you can see we have this list. This is those state images. And if I select one, I get the image, I get the text, I get all of the scrolling, this full independent scrolling. Not only that, but I have touch on here, but it's not touching. I blame the emulator for that. But now the one thing that this device is designed strictly for this mode, because if I change the direction, nothing happens. And that's because they want you to actually use this tablet in landscape mode. So there's probably more manipulation I need to make it actually reorient itself. But the main focus was to make it do this. The foldable does work. There's a control over here. There's a control over here for the foldable where you can have it folded or open or half open. If it's folded, it looks just like a normal phone and it acts just like a normal phone. If it's open, it looks more like the tablet and has the split screen. I don't think we have time for me to load that up, do we? We have like 8 minutes. So that's it. That's all I've got. I'm going to close some things here. And we're going to wrap this up. I have 4 code labs from Google Code Labs that you guys should look at. Theming, if you want to know more about the theming and Compose and Material 3. If you're new to Compose, the very first one, Compose Basics, it'll take you right through it. The bottom one, Build Adaptive Apps. I did not use any of these to make what I made. I had some other demos that I deep dived for to find. But I wanted you guys to at least have something to kind of look to if you wanted to. And also, you have a migration path for migrating to Compose if you want to take your app and transition it over to Compose. They did say you can run them both side by side in the same app, so you can have XML and Compose together. I don't think you can have them together on the same screen, but you can have. I'll take your word for it. I didn't try that lab, but yeah.
The XML has a widget that will hold that's a container for Compose View.
Of course it does.
Drop into, and that does help for like some kind of strangler thing, and then Compose has a view that you can embed an XML into,
So this is the last slide. We have an upcoming social event on the 10/20-ish.
I actually updated it during this, so it probably didn't update since you were doing the slideshow. But it's now posted as of 10 minutes ago.
And
10:20, we don't know what time yet. So
there you go. So a community social event. And then we have our DevFest conference that starts in December. Now it's actually December 2nd. Well, it might be both days depending on if we get enough workshops, courtesy of Google. If you do want to do a talk, we're still keeping it open. Okay. There's a link that he'll get you where you can submit a talk if you want. We'll look it over and determine whether or not we think it's value. No, I'm kidding. Whether or not it would be good for the event. So we've got people from all over the place. I think we had a couple from Europe submit. One from a few other countries submit. So it's not just people here locally. But it's normally it's a 1-day conference, but it could be a 2-day. If it's a 2-day, then obviously the first is probably all workshop based, like 2 to 3 hour workshops. And then the second day would be mostly 40, 50-minute sessions all day.
And it'll be at UMKC,
And we can tell you firsthand, it is the cheapest conference you'll ever go to. And I don't mean that, but it's not free, mind you. But it's like apples and oranges compared to KCDC. KCDC is like $800-900 now. We're not even close.
It's about 400.
Yeah, right. I think the highest we ever charged was $40.
I think 45.
45, yeah.
My personal goal this year is to be 25. Typically, the ticket just covers the cost. So we'll see.
Yeah, because we're not in it to make
Don't
money.
do a t-shirt and it'll be cheaper.
Right.
T-shirts.
Yeah, we don't do it to make money because we're not for profit. So therefore, there's no incentive for us to charge hundreds of dollars. Now, if we got Bartle Hall, then yeah, we would have to charge a few $100s because that venue's expensive, and that's why it's $800 or $900. KCDC started at Johnson County Community College because I went to one of those, a few of those events back then. So it's they've grown quite a bit, and the last time I attended that event, I was a speaker because I couldn't afford a ticket either. So anyway, I'm going to stop sharing now. Thank you all for coming.